with Cinema Libre Studio, which is headquartered in Burbank, California. We're a full-service distribution company, so we handle sales and distribution in all mediums around the world. Domestically, we handle theatrical booking, DVD sales, VOD, educational sales. We also sell to broadcasters in the US, and then we sell to other distributors all over the world. We also, besides the distribution and sales components, have marketing, PR, graphic design, web design, accounting, legal, and a full-service post house on site. So it truly is a one-stop shop. The company's been in existence for about 13 years, and I head up the distribution and the acquisition side of the company. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Linda Nelson. I'm a co-founder of Indie Rights. Indie Rights is a subsidiary of a small studio by the name of Nelson Madison Films. And my partner and I started out as filmmakers. And we decided around 2007 that we needed to get into the distribution business because we weren't finding the distribution that we wanted for our own films that we were producing. So we were lucky to start at the beginning of the digital age. So we became partners with companies like Amazon and Google as they were starting. And so now we represent about 400 filmmakers. And we offer global distribution. We attend AFM, which is coming up, and work very closely with our filmmakers to help them find an audience for their film.
My name's Tori Kais. I have a long background in helping putting out movies. I have a company, Plastic Media. We've been putting out movies for major distributors and studios for the last almost 9 years. And I'm also an independent producer as well, making 10 projects in the next 2 years. So I understand both sides of the table.
Hi everybody, my name is Franco, last name is Sama. I always say that because if I say Franco Sama, people think my last name is Osama. So I like to take a beat in between. My company is called Samako Films, located in Brentwood, California, and I have executive produced 22 films in the last 6 years. I have 12 films in development, and as an executive producer, my outreach is to investors, both private equity individuals, private equity groups, and debt facilities. So essentially I package films, bringing in the name talent, the distribution, and of course the financing.
Okay, great. So I think totally spontaneously we have divided ourselves into the finance side and the distribution side, which is awesome. Or finance and producing and distribution. So since chronological is easy, time runs in one direction, let's start with financing and sort of producing. So since we started here, let's start there. Franco, can you talk about what kinds of sort of the array of projects you're doing, budgets, sizes, that kind of thing? And I think we want to focus today a little bit more on the small, like really, really small independent features, and kind of how you intersect there, and what kind of work you do to get those financed.
Sure, great. Well, my sweet spot, I guess we would want to define a low budget, because everybody sort of has their own definition of that. My sweet spot is $1 to $3 million. That said, I have a couple of films out there right now that we're doing in the $500,000, $600,000, $750,000 range. And but most of them sort of fall these days. Most of them sort of fall into like 1.5 to 2-ish range. So that's really where I sort of excel. Part of the reason for that, part of the reason why I've stayed in that budget range for so long, is because my big thing is, making investors happy, right? For all of our sake, we want them to be happy. And I have a catchphrase that I say to producers and clients and students that getting the money isn't the hard part. Getting the money back is the hard part. So that's kind of where I live, right? I live in the world of, yes, raising financing, but more importantly, sort of defining the pathway for the recoupment. So, and distribution has a huge, obviously, role to play in that, because without distribution, nobody will ever see the film and nobody will buy a ticket or click to rent. So for me, where I have the most success is in that range, in that 5 to 750 range, to up to, like I said, about $1.5 million. Now I do have different deals in place with different partners. So it all depends on where the movie's going to be shot, in terms of where the money's going to come from. So there's a lot of different angles around that. It is better, and people don't like hearing me say this, particularly writers and producers, but it is better and quicker if the producer has some access to some skin in the game. So for example, if it's $1 million film and they can at least bring 20% maybe into the equation, it changes the entire conversation. And the simple reason is because most investors, I try to help people see things from the investor's perspective, and most of them aren't willing to take 100% of the risk on anything for anyone, myself included. So in my case, for example, I have a film I'm shooting in Thailand, 2017. I have 2 I'm shooting in Thailand. And just 2 weeks ago, we did a round of financing on it for about 30% of the budget is private equity, cash money in the bank, and that's the launch pad where I can then go pull in all of the other elements. So having a little bit of money doesn't hurt. It's not impossible the other way, but it's a little easier.
Tori?
I guess I'd like to piggyback off of that, specifically for people who are, filmmakers, producers, writers. To me, what I see from the film finance side is really being able, and from the distribution side, because I have one foot in both worlds, right? The most interesting thing that I think that you should think about as you're going into making a project, whatever project it may be, and I'm actually dealing with this right now with a distribution client, is as a filmmaker, you have to understand that the movie business is a business. You're here to get your return, and there are so many variables that go into making sure that your movie is capable of returning money, i.e. when your release date is, who you pick for talent, where you're going to shoot the film. There's so many creative ways you can get financing, from film incentives and bank collateral and matching funds. You can be creative with how you get the money in, but you have to make sure that you understand how to make the money back, and that you're cognizant of that. And especially as a filmmaker, when you come to a distributor or someone who is savvy at putting out films, that you listen to understanding what those variables are, i.e., if you're going to try and go up against a big blockbuster film for your release date, you have to know you're not going to make your money back. You're missing out on half your foot traffic. You have to understand that maybe you don't need to open in 2,500 theaters like you'd really like to. Maybe you can really just open in 150 or 500, or maybe you can do straight to DVD or VOD or streaming or Netflix or whatever it may be. So I guess for me on the film finance side is understanding how much money you really need to make a movie. Because while it may be really nice to want a $1.5 million budget, do you really need it? Or, does your talent demand it? If the talent demands it, can you find some other talent who might be able to get you to where you need to go that's a better fit? So you really need to take a look as a filmmaker for the variables and make sure that they're in line with your ultimate goal and know how to make your money back.
So let's piggyback on that in thinking, I like staying in this range of kind of under 2 million, because I think that's what's going to be most applicable applicable to our audience and to younger filmmakers and newer filmmakers. Where do you make your money back? From the distribution side, if you have a $1 million, $1.5 million movie, where does that movie best get its return? And so where should a filmmaker be thinking about? And it's, is it VOD? Is it pay-per-view? Is it theatrical?
I'm going to defer to you to go first
Okay.
because that budget range.
You're gonna let me be the bad guy first.
To do that,
Okay.
our budget range is maybe a tier lower.
Okay, yeah, and I mean, how many of you are making films over 2 million? Anybody? Or have that in mind? Okay. No, I agree. The 1 million, maybe even 500,000 to 1 million, that's in a pretty reasonable range, at least for my company, to recoup for filmmakers. But there are also so many different variables, and I think everyone up here can attest to that. You can't just apply every single film to the same formula and say, okay, it was this budget and it's going to have this release, and so it's going to make this much money. It depends on the talent you have, both in front of the camera and behind the camera, and obviously all sorts of other things, the story and such. But these days we are certainly selling more on the VOD side. The broadcast side, even internationally, those are the two mediums that international distributors are most interested in from us. I don't know if that's the same with you, Linda, but theatrical in the United States is extremely expensive, but it's also the one that every filmmaker wants, understandably. It is kind of the holy grail, but it's much of my job is explaining to filmmakers that theatrical doesn't always make sense because you're going to incur a great amount of expense, and that expense has to be recouped somewhere along the line. It's going to come out of your DVD or VOD or broadcast or international sales before you or we ever see any profit off of that. So, as you're saying, some people want 2,500 screens, but that's not always a realistic thing. Sometimes 5 screens will do it. Sometimes 1, opening city will do it. And the idea is to open theatrically, make the biggest buzz you can, because that will affect the other ancillary sales. But there are so many different ways these days to boost up that that buzz about a film. Grassroots outreach, I'm a big believer in. Our company tends to specialize in social issue documentaries, which are a very niche product compared to many of the other films that you guys may be dealing with. But I know for that particular kind of film, it works great. But overall, I'd say for us, VOD and broadcast are the two mediums that are going to have the best chance of making back the money for our films.
Okay, something that's very, very interesting that has changed in the past 5 years is that the shelf life of a film now is dramatically different than it used to be. In the past, you would have your theatrical release, then you would go to maybe broadcast and DVD, and believe me, if you're for a small independent film, you didn't stay very long in Blockbuster because they had to make room for the next movie, right? That's what's totally changed the distribution game. We now have a Blockbuster in the sky that has an unlimited shelf space, absolutely unlimited. We have films in our library that were released 3, 4, 5 years ago that are growing in audience and growing in the revenue that they're generating. In the past, these would have been long dead and out of print, okay? We have a different game here, folks. I believe this is the very best time that filmmakers, independent filmmakers, especially lower budget independent filmmakers, have to actually sustain themselves as filmmakers through their art. And so that's really, really important to us. The thought of our, I can say, I don't think we might have 1 or 2 out of 400 films that cost over $1 million. All right. We have $20,000 films that are successful. I mean, really successful. Last year, we had 2 films in this festival. One was called Radicalized. It was a social issue doc that had a zero budget. The film was made by some filmmakers who actually were part of the Occupy movement. And this documentary was just phenomenal. And they had some music connections, so it has great EDM music track. We sold it to Russia, right, to Russia Today, and immediately recouped, right? Immediately. We did a one-week theatrical in Los Angeles, and that's our frequent pattern for low-budget movies. We do a one-week theatrical, you get a review from the LA Times, good or bad. Oftentimes they're not really kind to super low-budget films, but it still gets you the exposure of a blockbuster film. All of a sudden, you're on Fandango because they sell tickets to that movie, right? You're on Rotten Tomatoes. Your poster's out there. People are looking at trailers and reading reviews, and that gets you the same exposure that a big film will get. But you're not going through the expense of having a drawn-out theatrical in 10, 15 cities that's going to drain you not only, of money, because you're not going to make money on it. It's just not going to happen, I don't think. Okay, and so then what do you have left to give, to your movie when it comes to really building an audience? Our movies don't have billboards on Sunset, right? But if you take the time to learn how to connect with your audience on social media, it's amazing what you can do. And so we're finding that we still are seeing revenue in all the traditional paths. We do a limited theatrical, even if it's only a week, but we still do DVD because DVD still sells and it's important and people want to see their film on DVD, and there's a large part of our country that still has not adopted digital. We're really only about 20% of the population fully digital in their viewing habits, and most of those are young people. Then we've got like another 20% that are only DVDs, and probably 80% doing both still. But the DVD thing is shrinking, we know that. So as we become all digital, that's where I think the future will be for revenue, but it is growing. And it's getting stronger and stronger. We've watched our business double, more than double every year. So that's a pretty good growth rate.
May I make one comment on it too? As Linda said, there's still a notion that on the part of a lot of filmmakers that you can put a movie in theaters and leave it there forever. And you used to be able to do that a long, long time ago and build the word of mouth. But these days, you've got 3 days to prove yourself, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And by Sunday night, the theater you're in, as well as your distributor, will know, or at least have a pretty darn good idea whether your movie's gonna hold over for a second week or be done by Thursday. So a lot of people still think, okay, I can put my movie in theaters and it's so great, and it usually is so great, and it'll build word of mouth, people will keep coming, we'll go on, but that's not it. You've got no screen space anymore. I think next week there are 29 films opening in theaters, which is crazy. So, as you're saying, there are nowadays so many different ways to get your film seen and keep it going for a long, long time that I really do advise, don't get stuck on the idea that it has to be in theaters. That isn't what it used to mean a long time ago.
I'd like to add one point. If you're not making a big budget movie, I specialize in more of the big budget movies, so I don't do a lot of lower budget stuff. Our movies that we put out or are part of are usually $5 million and above. But I do understand the pain of an independent filmmaker because I've worked with them in helping craft their campaigns. And if you're not going the theatrical route, it's on you. It's both a curse and a blessing. A lot of the work is all on you. So it's on you to connect with those audiences and do the guerrilla connection on social media and build those audiences. But that also means that you're ultimately in control as well, which you won't get at a major studio. You cannot be in control of how they market your film. You cannot tell them how many theaters you're going to be in. But as an independent filmmaker with those lower budget films, it's all on you, which is, you know, both really difficult and really awesome.
Now I have something to say. So, yeah, I mean, to her point in terms of the control thing, this is what I tell filmmakers about the financing, right? If you just think about for a second, and I know in some worlds it sounds impossible, but if you were a filmmaker with $1 million film and you came to the table with $200,000 towards that film, it puts you in a completely different position. You're not out there passing the tin cup anymore, asking people to contribute to your movie, right? You've earned a seat at the table, and you are a key decision maker moving forward, all the way through to distribution and beyond. So it's not just about the practicality of having contributed something for skin in the game for the film financially, but it's also the control of your destiny on your film, especially if you are a first-time director, because that's where a lot of people get caught up. A lot of people come to me and they want to do a first-time film directing, which is fine, except they want to do a $3.8 million movie, which investors won't support, right? But if they do something for $500,000 and they cut their teeth and they get some experience on a set, then the next time maybe they can up the budget. The other thing I just want to mention, since we were talking about, I have a movie right now. We just completed a limited theatrical release in 8 markets. The movie's called Game of Aces, and it stars Chris Klein from American Pie, and Victoria Summer, and Werner Don. This was a small budget film, but we did an 8 market release. And what's been so great about it, to your point earlier, is it was in and out of theaters in a flash, but the press and the media and the reviews and social media and everything that we're garnering right now has been tremendous. And so we're poised now to do our international distribution negotiations, because we have something now that the world knows about, wants to see more of, and it gives us a little bit of a leg up. The other thing is, by virtue of having a legitimate US theatrical release, it tends to increase the value of your film in the international marketplace by about 20%. So now that territory that was going to give you $100,000 might offer you $120,000. And you multiply that times 50 territories, you just picked up a few extra bucks that you're going to need along the way to continue to keep this thing moving.
So we talked a bit about kind of what VOD, internet, these are sort of some broadcast. So I know, Tori, your films are a bit bigger, but what kinds of things do you need to be playing in those markets? So in terms of, there's a lot of different versions of a $500,000 movie, but maybe can you call out a couple of things, like if you're doing a genre film, these are some things to be thinking about. If you're doing a more theatrical, if you're doing a documentary, keep these things in mind, because this is what's gonna help you play in those VOD and pay-per-view markets versus not.
I mean, I think we can speak to the specifics, but from a general consensus perspective, I think you need to look at the type of movie you're trying to make, the budget of what you have versus what they have, and then study their marketing campaigns. How, you know, if they did a theatrical release, and it was limited, where did they release it? Was it successful? Did it work? Did it not? Distributors know what markets work for foot traffic. So heavily lean on your distributor. They know way more than you ever will about distribution. I got into this argument with a filmmaker. It's very difficult because you think you know everything about movies because you are so passionate. But trust me, your distributors know everything. They really do. Anyways, the point is the film is template-y business. So if you can look at what other filmmakers have done successfully, it won't always work for you, but you can have an idea of what does work and what doesn't work on a general rule, and don't be afraid to try to break them. Just know what you're up against.
That brings up a really good point, and I'm going to just get a little bit more specific about what you can do to help when you're starting to think about distribution. First of all, you should start thinking about it when you're in pre-production at least. Or even when it's just an idea or when you're writing the script, because you can really start to build your audience at that point. It's amazing how many filmmakers are now coming to us for distribution. They've already got 10, 15,000 fans on Facebook and 20,000 Twitter followers. Let me tell you, that works as good as a billboard. And it can even work better because a billboard is just about people driving by. There's no targeting going, it's just who's ever driving by the street, right? Well, what's great about social media marketing is that you can super target. For example, we have this very tiny budget, maybe $50,000 film. It's a drama. It's about two women that are friends, and one of these women's child is seeing his dead father. It has a little bit of a supernatural story to it, but it's pretty much a drama. It's something very, very difficult traditionally to sell. But what this woman did was, starting when she was in production, she found movies that were big budget movies that she thought, well, if people like this movie, they're gonna like my movie. And she started going to those movies on Twitter, following those followers, and then if they didn't follow her back, she'd drop them. So by the time she finished her movie, she had 20,000 followers on Twitter that were ready to back her, and those were people that would like her movie. And she kept them appraised of how production was going and everything along the way. So these are the kinds of things that we now can do because we have the tools. Another fabulous resource is IMDb Pro. It's something that every filmmaker needs to subscribe to because you can do research on that site relative to distribution. It's just absolutely incredible. You can look for films that are like yours, that are bigger budget films. You can see who distributes those kinds of films. And that brings me to another point, and we'll talk about that later, is that there's a lot of pitfalls in distribution, and you have to be really careful, and you can do a lot of homework by using IMDb Pro as a tool. So we'll talk more about that later.
I'd also like to add that you should get Variety Insights, purely because what a lot of people don't realize about distribution, and it's really not as much of an issue for a super low budget project that don't necessarily have a lot of talent. But when you're talking about international, which is where a lot of people make their money back for their films, you really need to know the bankability of the talent that you have attached. Packaging is very important if you want to do bigger budget films ever. You really have to understand who's the best in their lane. We have an A-list attached to one of the movies that I'm producing, but he's not very popular because he said some things that he shouldn't have said. So now the international market doesn't want to buy his movie. So now we have to make a decision as a producer. Are you going to keep him or are you going to replace him? Because are you going to make your money back? Which is really what all of the question comes back to.
And speaking of that, I'll give you an example. A film that I did produce back, I guess it was around 2010, 2011-ish maybe. It's called Guns, Girls, and Gambling, and it's got Christian Slater, Dane Cook, Chris Kattan, Powers Booth, great cast. But at $3 million, sales would be a potential issue there, particularly in the international marketplace. So we were lucky enough to get Gary Oldman to come in and play in the film for several days. It changed the entire scope of the film. The film got made, it did very well, and it got picked up by Universal, and it was a success story. But the casting is such a critical part of it that I agree. That's the conversation. I have a sort of a development program that I put into place, and I call it the 6 critical people that you have to bring in as a team if you're going to get started and do this the right way. And two of those people are an international sales rep and a domestic sales rep. just so that you can get the perspective from those people, because at the end of the day, these are the people that are responsible to sell the film. And they know better than I do or my investors do about who should I put in this film that's going to make it sell. So what we do is we do a little powwow. We'll get in a room with the writer, the director, the producer, the casting director, the international sales rep, and the domestic sales rep, and myself, and we'll take our wish list and we'll start crossing off names of people who are never going to do this movie. And then we're going to start adding names of people who we hadn't thought of before. And whether that comes from a casting director saying, oh, I can pick up the phone and call so-and-so, great, put them on the list. Or a distributor saying, you know, this person makes matters in Germany, for example, and you know, I think I can get a sale of X amount of dollars based on this person if you put them in the movie. And I've actually constructed films that way, based on the dollars of what they represent in different territories, in terms of who to put the puzzle pieces together for the casting. So I think it's a very valid point there.
Yeah, which goes to show that when you're in the production stage, pre-production stage, the stuff doesn't just happen magically or haphazardly. You know, these guys are thinking about it before it's ever even, you know, a frame has been shot. And I agree. Think about the marketing while you're in pre-production, because by the time you get to us, the distributor, we're really going to appreciate that. And we all need to work together, especially on lower budget indie films, to get it out there. And social media is great. Like Linda says, it's a way to directly target your audience. You know, with documentaries, I can definitely attest to that. We had a film, Lost Angels, Skid Row is my home, that we opened in down at the ArcLight in Hollywood, but it's about the homeless community in downtown LA. We reached out to organizations that dealt with that specific issue and got them on board to help promote the film. We have one that's just done about an unusually long theatrical release called Baxed, From Cover Up to Catastrophe. It's done over $1 million in box office, which is an anomaly for a documentary. But it was the people who drove that box office completely. And it's our efforts as a distributor and the filmmakers' efforts to reach out to those people directly and say, here's where it's going to open, here's what we need you to do to help us get the word out. And they would go out and rally people. So that direct marketing and the tools that we have these days to do it, which are relatively inexpensive, they make things possible now that you just couldn't do before.
So we've had, I think in passing, we've kind of mentioned like things you can do early. I want to ask, what's the flip side of that? What are the things that you guys see that come across your desk and you're like, man, if they had just, what are the big problems that people need to know, or the big pitfalls that are going to catch them up before they walk into your office?
Can I go there?
Yeah.
Okay. So, I just said this to somebody out in the lobby. I think for me, you remember my focus is finance. You know, distribution is a branch of that, but it really comes down to the money. At the end of the day, you got to have money if you're going to make a movie and if you're going to do it right. So, you know, people always talk about pre-production, that they say that the more pre-production you do, the better your principal photography is going to be, right? Because you're better prepared. If you can spend 8 weeks in pre-pro instead of 2, you're better off. Your shoot's going to go better. Well, I take it back a step and say, that's the same thing for development. Before you get into pre-pro, if you spend the time in development, really developing your project, the problem is, to directly answer your question, most people who come to me with nothing more than a script. So the answer to the question is, they're not ready for an investor. It's not time for an investor. The thing that you have to understand about investors is they're not here to help us. They're not here to advance our career or to make our dreams come true. They're here for one reason and one reason only: to make money. That's what investors do. They invest and they get money back. And if we are insisting on them trying to figure out a way to get them to understand us, it's never going to work. What we need to do, and what I've been doing the last 3 years, is helping filmmakers understand them. We need to fit into their world. Because a script is, in the eyes of an investor, is 100 pieces of paper with words on it. And in theory, what you're doing is you're walking into an investor's office or into mine and handing us 100 pieces of paper with words on it and saying, I want $2 million for this. And we're going to look at you like you're crazy. Now, this isn't to discount the fact that there's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that went into writing that script. Nobody's discrediting the value of the material. That is the most important thing. The problem is, it is not investable. There is nothing to invest in. If you guys watch Shark Tank, which is one of my favorite shows, you hear it all the time. They say all the time, you're not investable. There's nothing to it. This isn't a business. It's too soon for you to bring an investor into this. It's a hobby. And we don't invest in hobbies. We invest in businesses so that we can get returns. And it's up to us as a community to present that. Let me say one more thing, because now I'm on a roll. I love being able to say this stuff, because I think it helps. I hope it does, right? Because here's the bottom line. At the end of the day, we have an obligation as a community to work together. And here's the way I look at it. And believe me, everything I'm telling you, I've done wrong at least once, okay? And that's where I'm coming from. Every time a filmmaker raises money and loses it, it hurts all of us. Because if you go and you get somebody to give you $500,000 and you do it wrong and you make that movie and you blow that $500,000, that investor, number one, you're in hot water with the investor, right? So there goes your next film, because you're going to be labeled as the person who lost money on their film. What's worse than that is that investor is going to shout it from the mountaintops. They're going to be talking about it at the yacht club and on the golf course and everywhere they go. And they're going to be telling all of their friends, whatever you do, stay away from those people, because they'll lose your money for you. So we've all heard the term ROI, which stands for return on investment. Well, I've rephrased that. I call it ROI, return of investment. Because if you can at least not lose the money, you're going to be okay. But as soon as if somebody gives you $500,000 and you can only give them $200 back, you're in trouble. So even if you don't make $10 million and triple their investment, just don't lose their money. I've said my piece. Thank you.
I'm going to add a piece to that. Back to your 6 people that you have in a room.